Morning. This is a joint hearing between the House Transportation Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. I don't know if we haven't done this in my time, and I'm excited to be here with you all, even if under fairly mediocre circumstances. So I think, as everyone knows, revenue for the Transportation Fund has been in trouble for a while. This fall, we had a rescission even, and so wanted to lay the groundwork that I think we've all talked about separately, but it seemed to make sense to do it together. As we're starting what will likely be a interesting session. So
I thank you very much for putting it together, and we look forward to what Logan has to say. Transportation is a core function of state government, and there's been long-standing trends going in the wrong direction in funding state transportation, and we are only going to find an answer if we vetted it through all the committees that are impacted or that have the chance to impact this situation.
Thanks. Floor is yours, Logan.
Great. For the record, I'm Logan Liver, Fiscal Office. I have a presentation to show you. Hold up here.
Bless you.
Hey.
Presentation on the transportation fund. Here's the obligatory slide that you've probably all seen a number of times now. So this presentation, I'm going to start by sort of just going over the very basics, just so we're all sort of on the same page for people who don't know or maybe need a reminder. We'll look at how we pay transportation. We'll look at the state, where the state money comes from, the revenue sources. Then we'll talk about the year-end, the FY25 year-end, and we'll look at the T fund year-to-date so far. Talk about the things happened when you all were off session. And then at the very end, we'll wrap it up with the conversation on some of the larger revenue challenges we're facing. So, starting off, very basically, how does Vermont pay for transportation? It's through a mix of federal, state, and local funds, with federal funds being the majority. In FY26, it was 51%. See there on the chart, that's the orange bar. They make up a large percentage most years of the transportation funding. With this federal funding, there's often a funding match. Typically, it's around 80% federal, 20% non-federal. It changes a little bit based on the project, but this is sort of the standard. And not all things that AOT does can be federally funded. So things like Department of Motor Vehicles and maintenance are largely state funded, but a lot of our projects that do use federal funding. And that brings us to state funds. We have the Transportation Fund, which is the primary funding source. And then we also have the TIP Fund, or the Transportation Infrastructure Bond Fund. That's a sub-fund of the T Fund, which is used to support some longer lasting projects. And that has some dedicated revenue sources for that. And then we have local funds and some other funds. Periodically, these are relatively small and are like a local match portion for projects in their area, such as that. That's the basics of how we pay for it. Now, where does our state money come from? So most transportation revenues are generated from 5 main sources. We have a gas tax, an assessment. We have a diesel tax, an assessment. We have the purchase and use tax, the DMV fees, and then we have miscellaneous other fees and sources. And I'll get into more detail on these in the upcoming slides. So that chart there is the forecast as was presented in July. We'll be getting an updated one next week, next Friday. But as of July, the T Fund in FY25 or FY27, excuse me, was projected to bring in $321.1 million. The TIP Fund will bring in $16.6 million from those funding sources there. You can see, if you look on the far right-hand side there, the forecast CAGR, the FY26 through FY30. This is the projected growth rate of these different revenue sources. You'll see that both the first two, the gas tax and the diesel tax, are projected to be declining revenue sources, with the gas tax declining almost 1% between 26 and 30. The third one there, the purchase and use tax, is one of the growing revenue streams we have. This one is expected to grow at 3.81%. The D&B fees and the miscellaneous revenues are both growing, but at a very modest 1% or around there. And then the TIB at the bottom, much like the gas and diesel tax for the T fund, are also projected to decline. Total state transportation revenues are expected to grow about 1.23% between 26 and 30. So we'll talk about these sources just a little bit so that we all have an understanding of them. The gas tax, Vermont has a hybrid gas tax system. This means we have a fixed portion and then two variable assessments, which I'll talk about in a minute. All gas taxes and assessments are levied as cents per gallon, and they're levied on the distributor level. They're not paid for by the individual gas stations, but the distributors distribute to the gas stations. And these are collected by D&B monthly. So the top section of the chart to the right there is the fixed portion. You'll see we have total fixed tax of 13.1 cents. Those are broken out. There's 12.1, which primarily goes into the T fund, but you'll see that there are some other small carve outs there for the DUI enforcement fund, fish and wildlife, such as that. So in total, the transportation fund gets 11.345 cents of that. There's then a 1 cent petroleum cleanup fee, which goes into the petroleum cleanup fund. And then you have the assessments there, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Those are 4% and a 2% assessment on the price of gasoline. That equates to, right now it equates to 13.4 cents that goes to the transportation fund and about 5 cents going into the TIP. There's some more nuance to that I'll mention. For the total state tax and assessments of 31.5 roughly, and then the feds levy an additional 18.4 cents. For a total gas tax, fed and state of about 50 cents, 49.9 this quarter. When we look at the assessments portion, so Vermont has a 4% motor fuel tax assessment and a 2% motor fuel transportation infrastructure assessment. These are levied on the tax adjusted retail price, and I won't get into all the details of the math, but essentially it's a 4% tax that goes into the transportation fund and a 2% tax that goes to the TIP fund. These fluctuate quarterly based on the price of gasoline. I have the equation there and some charts that sort of show you some historic things, but I won't go into all of it right now unless people are interested in that.
Is that sort of
Yeah.
You say at the pump, so that's a percent of the retail price that the consumer pays, not the wholesaler pays.
Yeah.
Still paid by the wholesaler though.
Still paid by the wholesaler, yeah. So really just Department of Public Services essentially collects the average for the quarter, and then the DMV calculates by going through the steps what the next quarter's assessment rate will be. That is then charged throughout that quarter. But it is based on the price at the pump. Subtract out all the taxes you pay, times it by 2% or 4% to get that motor fuel tax assessment rate that is charged for the next quarter. So it's based on previous quarters, if that makes sense.
But it's all collated is the wrong word, but sort of all of the gas that distributor sells is what the tax is levied on.
Correct, yes. Yep.
Regardless of where it's sold.
Correct, yep. So it would be the distributor will pay the tax based on how much they purchase.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just clarification to make sure I'm following this. So Logan, if I'm looking at the previous page and the bottom total state and federal taxes and assessments, 49. Is that like basically 50 cents added to 1 gallon of gas?
Yep, yep. That's a per gallon tax, right?
Then,
Yeah, Representative
and
Brannigan.
so then that same figure then appears, the next page, bottom right, the very last one, 0.4.
Wait, we haven't done that slide yet.
We've done
Hold
this
your
one.
horse. Oh, okay, thanks.
Correct, yep. Yeah, so the very far right-hand column is just the total, it's the same number, it's the total state and federal taxes, so they should be the same there. Perfect. So I have some charts that will look at sort of the trends over the past, I guess, back to 94, so a little while. This is gallons of gas tax in Vermont. You'll see that consumption peaked in the early 2000s, has been declining since then. That big drop down is COVID, people stopped driving. It's come back a little bit, but not nearly to what we were seeing. And then as forecasted, it is expected to continue to decrease in the future. So again, this has been a trend that's been occurring since the early 2000s.
Sorry, that's Vermont data?
Yes, this is gallons of gas tax in Vermont.
Yeah.
And then this is the essentially revenue collected from the gas tax and assessment, going back to June of 2001. I've labeled here some shifts in the gas tax. There's been some changes. If we want to get into the details of these, I can discuss them. You'll see there, again, mirroring the previous chart during COVID, we saw the big decrease in gas tax, and it's come back a little, but is still declining in the dollars collected from that revenue source.
Just had a question of how, if we didn't have a floor, because currently we have a floor right now, so regardless of how low it gets, we still get a tax based on, what is it, $3 and
Yep.
change. If that wasn't in effect or we changed that at all, how would it affect that chart up there?
Yeah, so that's a good question, actually, and I'll go back to this assessment page, which I guess I skipped over. You'll see there, below the 4% and the 2% assessments, we have these minimums that are in place, right? So for the 4% that goes into the T fund, there's a minimum rate that the state will collect, and that is 13.4 cents, which if you do the math, that occurs when the price at the pump is $3.87. We also have a maximum then of 18 cents. So even if prices went above $5.08 at the pump, we would only ever collect the 18 cents. For the 2%, we only have a minimum. So at $2.48 at the pump, we'd be collecting our minimum of about 3.9 cents there. So that allows for a little bit of sensitivity for pricing when prices go up. Not only might people be buying less gas, but gas is more expensive for the state to use. So there's it allows for us to collect a little bit more time when we need it, and then when gas is cheap, we also decrease the amount that we collect. So by changing those, I will say the 4% going into the T fund has collected the minimum for a very long time. I can only remember like 2 quarters in the past, probably 4 years or 5 years that has collected more than the minimum, just because that's what the price of gas has been. The 2%, because it's a lower assessment, does fluctuate a little bit more than that. Theoretically, changing the minimum on the 4% would essentially equate to just raising the gas tax as it currently stands now. And that's based on consumption. For every penny you raise the gas tax, it brings in about $2.85 million. So you can do the math there. Again, these are price sensitive, so if the price of gas goes up, we will start collecting more. Right now, we are collecting the minimum. Does that?
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
When did we last raise the gas tax in Vermont, and how much did we raise it?
Well, when we last changed the gas tax is when we included the assessment portion of it, and that was in 2013, essentially. So we did that by decreasing the fixed portion and adding in the assessments, and they sort of phased in over time. So we added in the 2% assessment first, and then we added in the 4% assessment afterwards. And that was along with then a decrease in which was a larger fixed portion decreased, and we added in the assessment. As you'll see from this chart, the revenues it did lead to more revenue into money, but I would have to go back and do, I guess, the math to see what the actual change on the total gas tax was. But it was in 2013 was the last time we sort of adjusted the gas tax.
And that's when Senator Westman was the chair of the House Transportation Committee, if you want some personal historic intel on it.
Great.
Was gas low then?
The price of gas?
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you.
because it seems like, with gas being down 35 cents now might be a good time to consider that gas tax.
We can use it.
So, back to you.
Great, all right, moving on to the diesel tax and assessment. Vermont levies 2 fixed taxes on diesel plus that petroleum cleanup fee that I mentioned. Gas tax, we have a 28 cents tax that goes to the T fund, then we have a 3-cent tax that goes to the tip fund. So the cleanup fund for a total Vermont diesel tax and assessment of 32 cents. The feds then applied 22.4 cents for a total diesel tax rate of 56.4 cents. In FY 26, forecasted to generate $18.1 million for the T fund and 2.1 million for the tip fund. Unlike gasoline, we do have some tax exempt uses for diesel, such as agricultural or state and municipal uses. They don't have to pay the diesel tax. Then moving on to the motor vehicle purchase and use tax. So this is a 6% tax on the value of motor vehicle purchases. This is collected by the DMV at the time of titling or when you initially get it registered in the state. And then there's a 9% tax on rental charges for short-term vehicle rentals. Under current law, 2/3 of the purchase and use tax revenue goes to the T fund, 1/3 of it goes into the education fund. In FY 26, estimated to be $148.9 million, with 99.3 going to the T fund and 49.6 going into the education fund. As we saw from the forecast, the purchase and use tax is one of the sort of few sources that we have that automatically sort of captures inflationary growth. As the price of vehicles increases, the amount of money we get from purchase and use also increases, as compared to the gas tax and the other ones which don't sort of capture any increase in inflation.
Representative Wilson.
The 9% tax on rental charges, 2 questions. 1, does that include ride shares or is that separate? And 2, if I'm doing a construction project and I need to rent a truck for 4 days to haul some debris.
For the ride shares, no, I don't believe it is included in short-term rentals. The other one, I guess I don't know the definition of short-term, but I would imagine that if you rented a pickup truck, you would still, but I would want to double check on that. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification for my recollection is that the money that was going to the ed fund was roughly 55 million, not 49.6. Did that get downgraded when they did the revenue?
So in July, there was
Yeah.
a revenue downgrade specifically in the purchase and use tax. We can go back to the forecast, and I have the same graph in a few slides that we can look at. I don't know if I have the downgrade on there, but it was decreased to get.
Yeah, because I just remember 55 and how that sort of played into our budget, but.
Sure, so it likely,
And we have an update coming a week from today.
we did.
Okay.
So if, say, a different amount of money was going into the education fund and to the transportation fund instead, what would happen to the education fund?
So absent of any new revenue, it would essentially be just a shifting of funds from one to another. And so either costs would have to be reduced somewhere or funds would have to make up for the funds that have been shifted.
So property taxes would go up.
That is, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Logan, do you happen to know when or how often items are defined as purchase and use versus sales tax? For example, trailers and whatnot that are haul all over the roads of vehicles and equipment and goods are sales tax and not purchase and use tax, which I
I know, that's
find
fun.
interestingly contrary to the kind of intuitively that I always thought the trailers would be purchase and use. And any idea when the last time that may have been reviewed of any, and who might be able to answer that in the future? Something I'll take with me, I guess, for a future piece,
I
but
don't know the last time it was reviewed. You are correct. Trailers pay the sales tax and then registration fees and stuff like that. They do not pay the purchase and use tax. I can't tell you why it's that way. That is the way it works now. I guess we can review that in the future. I could look into the history of that, but I don't have that at me.
What's the difference between a sales tax and a purchase and use tax? I'm so sorry.
Wow.
Someone else.
Well, I think it's based on what they're applied to essentially. So it's a 6% purchase and use because it's on the purchase of a motor vehicle. I guess you could maybe consider that a sales tax. I don't know. I guess I don't know is
Okay.
the answer to that question.
I'm sure.
Chris Rubin.
Yeah.
When you were speaking of trailers, are we speaking of tow behind, two-wheeled trailers behind a vehicle? Or are we talking about a manufactured home? What?
The first one.
I'm referring to trailers that you tow behind and register.
But it could have more than, it could have lots of wheels if it was
It could.
behind, right?
And I am referring to the items that are then registered and driven over the road. It seemed that I would have thought that that money would be purchase and use, and it's not. It is sales tax oriented.
Chris,
Just something I wanted everybody to hear, so.
Chris Roop, do you want to jump into testimony? Your face looks like you do.
Only if you want to, Madam Chair, President Joint Municipal, I do think this is be a very great question for my colleague from Ledge Council to answer once he gets a chance to do the appropriate research. I would like to remind the committee that we call it the purchase and use tax. Its formal name is the motor vehicle purchase and use tax. So I'm not a lawyer, but I would go ahead and limb and say that the presence of a motor in the vehicle might have something to do with differentiating what tax falls under.
Well, I think we will wait a moment for any attorneys to be available to answer that question. Thank you. Back to you, Logan.
Of course. We good on
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So here's another chart looking at the historic trends there. You see the call out there. This is when in 2004, the purchase and use allocation was changed. It used to be 1/6 going into the education fund, with about 3 cents of the gas tax also going into the education fund. It was switched at that time to have no gas tax going into the education fund. The purchase and use was also increased 1%. Maybe that was earlier. Then it was increased to 2/6 or 1/3 as it is today. That was occurred in 2004. You can see the trends there. Again, during COVID, we saw a little bit of a decline, but then post-COVID, we've really seen the purchase and use tax sort of exploding growth, leveling out now. We can talk about how it's looking year to date. DMV fees. So these are fees that you pay for at the DMV, such as driver's license, vehicle registrations. It's a whole long list of them. Expected to generate approximately $101.7 million for the transportation fund. These fees are set by the legislature via periodic fee bills. The last time that happened was in 2024. Very recently, there's some links if you want to look at it. There's nuance to the fees, and then miscellaneous revenues. I also just stay on the fee bills. DMV fees go to pay for more than just what the fee is directly related to. It goes to pay for the entire transportation system as a whole. So this $101 million goes to more than just sort of DMV. It also goes to roads, bridges, and things like that, which is sometimes different than other fees. And then miscellaneous revenues, this is a variety of smaller sources. They're expected to generate about 21.8 million in FY26, and there are just a few of them. There are many more than that. So here's the historic trends of the DMV fee revenues with some call outs for the fee increases. You'll see the latest one there, effective January 1st, 2024. Increased it by, I think it was like across the board, over 19% increase. You can see then throughout the years, the amount of times then when they've changed it.
It's actually interesting how much we really just sort of like brought it back into the line that it was
Yeah.
running at before. Thanks.
And the concerning pieces on that is that it was 19+%, and the actual revenue generated has not come quite close to the 19. And now you'll see a sliding down, which we're going to see some significant more testimony on, related to a number of things that are not happening in renewals and non-inspected vehicles on the road and non-registered and a whole lot of things. So the 20%, 19% didn't come close to increasing 19%. So, but it does put us back on a trajectory that we need. But there's significant more work going to be done in our committee related to why it didn't come close to 20%.
Great, let us know.
Logan, do you know the inspection sticker fees? How much goes to the state out of that? And I guess what is your tweet for that particular fee?
Sure, so we get $8 per sticker issued. And tell you the exact amount here in 1 second. As of June 30th, 2025, inspection sticker fees brought into the state $3,205,776.
Yeah, and just to sort of piggyback on that question, which is a good question, because there's some discussion about changes to inspection requirements. But and it was a question I asked in committee, hope to get an answer at some point, I'm sure we will, is the cost of managing that program. So the costs associated with managing all the people and, you know, verifying their inspectors and running the computer systems that they use. So that sort of is offset by something. We don't really know at this point what that is.
Okay. Moving on. Now we'll look at sort of the year end, what happened off session, and then look at revenues year to date so far. So when we ended FY25, the transportation fund was $7.4 million below estimate. You can see that on the right side of the screen, the cumulative year to date, this revenue was largely due to the purchase and use tax, and then also the D&B fees falling behind what was forecasted. So we're below about 2.3% at the end of the year. We then got the July forecast, which downgraded the transportation fund in FY26, but then also downgraded purchase and use and the DMV fees all the way out through the forecasted period. So this downgrade of $7.5 million in FY26 triggered a required a reduction in the FY26 budget to sort of bring it back into balance. So the agency, and I'll just talk about this briefly because someone from the agency is here to discuss this more in detail with you. So, but essentially the agency, we had to bring the transportation budget back into balance. So they presented this rescission plan. It was adopted on September 18th and is in effect. And then looking at the transportation revenues this year, so this is through July through December. As of December, where total revenues are sort of right on track forecasts. And for those of you who have seen versions of this portion, this has changed in the last few months. Purchase and use has had a couple of good months. So you'll see there on the right-hand side, cumulative year to date, purchase and use is above what it was forecasted to be now, 3.2% above target. A lot of our other revenue sources are still below target year to date, but because of the overperformance in the purchase and use these past few months, we're now sort of right on target. I guess I don't know what to say about future years. We'll see if that trend continues. Hopefully, purchase and use continues to grow. Before this, it had been not meeting its targets, so it'll be interesting to see how it continues in future months, and so definitely be something that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Do you have any idea of how much of sort of this year's like month to month anomalous purchase and use numbers was about processing?
Oh,
And
process.
how much of it was actual purchasing
I don't.
patterns?
I know.
Like, I'll ask Tom next
Yeah, and so I don't know specifics. I know November, reporting based on the holiday at the end of the month and how it kind of, there are some weird reporting things with that. I don't know if this is sort of abnormal to other years or sort of if it is truly purchasing or truly sort of a reporting type of deal. That would be a question maybe for DMB who collects all this information. And maybe something they could look at in the future, for sure. Okay, the last section now is we'll talk about some of the larger transportation fund challenges, which you've seen a lot of it through the beginning of this presentation. And that's essentially that most transportation fund revenues are stagnant. They don't keep up with the inflation rate. We have the decreasing gas consumption due to increased fuel efficiency as well as electric vehicle adoption. We have demographic constraints which limit vehicle purchases and registrations, leading to flat fee revenues. The T-fund revenues, as we sort of already mentioned, are projected to only grow at 1.33%, which is lower than recent inflation levels have been. When we look at specific cost factors related to transportation and construction industry specifically, we see that nationally construction costs have increased by about 62% since 2020. That's according to the National Highway Construction Cost Index. And then along with salaries and benefits, which have been increasing statewide, all these things are representing cost pressures on a fairly stagnant transportation revenue sources. So here's just a look at the forecast, a different look at it, I guess. The green line is the forecasted available transportation fund, and then the red line is if you take that number and you adjust it for inflation and make it into 2013 dollars. This allows you to look sort of at the purchasing power of it on a flat basis. Right now, I think we're maybe just above where we were in 2013, but if the forecast continues as it was in July, we will likely be below where we were purchasing power for 2013. And this is assuming 3% on inflation in the out years, which could be higher.
I think it says it at the very bottom of the screen, but it's too tiny for my eyes. What is the inflator that you use for the transportation fund?
So for this one, for this chart, we use the personal consumption index.
That
there are a number of ways you.
that seems really low to me from what I've heard from folks about transportation costs.
So transportation, especially in the construction industry, has seen far greater than 3%. This chart, I chose to use 3% in this index because transportation is not only construction, I guess. And so this is one view to see it. I'll show you on the next slide, a sort of look at the growth and the inflation in the construction cost index specifically, which is more, I guess, specific to like building roads and paving and stuff like that. So it's just a different way to sort of visualize it. But yeah, you could definitely, the 3% assumption is probably conservative and would likely be higher than that in future years.
And just remind us, it's 1.2% that we're expected growth in the T fund.
Yeah, so
How does that-
T fund itself is 1.33.
1.2, 3%. Something's not adding up.
Right.
We should have gone in all-
Well, we've got a little alligator situation at the end there, yeah.
So to your point, this is another chart that sort of looks at the same thing. The gray line there is that change in the National Highway Construction Cost Index. That's the one that's specific. You'll see that since 2010, it's grown by over 120%, whereas T-fund revenues have grown by maybe 50% since then. So this kind of looks at another way to look at the same thing.
I guess at this point, I would want to interject, Logan, that our towns and municipalities face the exact same pressure with less options on revenue. Only in this last T-fund or T-bill that we put in even any inflationary measure to increase town highway and structure funds, which is not even close to that construction cost. So as much as we know the discussion's driven towards education and purchase use tax and other funds, our ability to help the towns is significantly constricted and is not even part of this. But out of the T funds, come money for town highway and structure projects. And the state is, T-fund money is limited. And I just want to really emphasize, we are doing nothing within this picture to increase any help to town, or very little. I don't want to say none, but we did put some small inflationary improvement in that area, but we are doing nothing extra to help the towns deal with that construction struggle like we're trying to address on a state level.
Yeah.
We have not yet done something in that area. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, your corner. Linus.
So sorry, do you have national comparison data on that jump in transportation construction costs or whatever it's called?
Yeah, so that is the National Highway Construction Cost Index.
Is Vermont tracking the national increase? Or-
Oh, like Vermont specific, I don't know that off the top of my head. I could probably find that, or your team might have some data specific to Vermont that could look, but I don't have that at the moment. But could find that for you. Sure.
Just,
Yes,
quick interjection. I'm just thinking about time and I don't have the
Yeah.
slide deck right in front of me. How many?
I have 3.
Great. Okay. I just want to make sure that we have
I'll
time.
be quick. They're real fast.
I just want to make sure we have time for.
Yeah,
comments. Yeah, thank you.
Good. So
We're slowing you. You're not the one slow. You're good. Thank you.
As I mentioned, federal funds make up a large portion of the transportation budget, so it's critical that we draw down these funds in order to fund transportation. This is another piece that actually the agency will present up shortly, but there's projected to be a state match deficit in FY27 of $33.4 million, threatening our ability to draw down all of those funds. This deficit is expected to increase in the future, assuming nothing else changes. In addition to the federal match, which is just one portion, there's also other funding needs such as town highway aid, as Chair Walker mentioned, climate resiliency, general maintenance, other things that all need to be funded. And then the last one, essentially, if we can't maximize our federal dollars, keep up with our maintenance and capital needs, our infrastructure will continue to deteriorate and cost more to address in the future. Backlogs are difficult to dig out of, require years of sustained additional investment, and infrastructure is always deteriorating.
And I know that the Transportation Committee knows this, and maybe everyone else on the Ways and Means Committee already knows this, but I was really interested at Transportation Oversight this fall to learn just how much more it does cost to pave just a couple of years after sort of it should be paved. Like the incremental increase in cost was very remarkable. Maybe everyone but me knew that much about paving. I don't know. So if anyone wants to like dive deeper, the JTAC testimony goes a little deeper on this stuff.
This is that federal funds or federal match outlook, which Candace will speak to. So I'll just talk about it briefly. That FY27, you can see the $33.4 million deficit, and I'll let Candace go into the details and answer any questions on that. And then my last slide is just one example of sort of the constraints we're facing. So in this year's budget, FY26, we spent or budgeted about $103 million for paving projects. AOT estimates that if we were to continue to pave at that level of investment, that by 2030, 60% of Vermont's roads would be in poor or very poor condition. You can see their chart there, which assumes that consistent $103 million investment and the breakout.
Yeah.
Just naming in while looking at that chart that we continue to have some of the strictest inspection, requirements in the country and some of the worst road conditions.
Vehicle inspection.
Right?
Thank you.
With that, I'll hand it over to Candace.
Inspection requirements and so on. Thank you so much.
The relationship between my power and road conditions
It's pretty
is
significant
poor.
right now.
Candace, thanks for joining us.
It's
It's like slalom, it's slalom over.
That's right.
It's so bad.
Hello, everyone. Okay, for the record, I'm Candace Alquist, Financial Officer for the Agency of Transportation. And I was going to go through our 5-year outlook that we presented at the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee in September, as well as our decision plan that was approved by the Joint Fiscal Committee in September. Does that sound good, Chair?
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen then. All right, this is small. I'm sorry. Let me.
That's great. Well,
Okay.
This is okay.
it seems like that's as big as you're gonna be able to get and keep it all on the screen.
I'll just believe the numbers you're telling us.
This was shared as well. But what we're looking at is a spreadsheet that the Agency of Transportation has historically created for the legislative policy committees. We did an update to it specifically in September, so this is a point in time snapshot. Up at the top, we have our federal formula funds from the IIJA. Then we go into non-competitive grant programs such as the Highway Safety Grant Program, and then other non-competitive or other competitive grant programs, which do fluctuate every year. And for the competitive grant programs, I like to point out that the difference between fiscal 28 and 29 is not because we project that we're going to be applying for less competitive grants. It's just that it's more challenging to project what competitive grants will be available far out. So you can see the difference between the 110 and the 63, just because we can't project what will be available that far in the future. Here we have the 7.5 million in fiscal 26. That was part of the rescission plan in September, which I'll get to in a moment. But what we typically focus on during the session is this number here, the deficit in state match. Give me just one moment. I pull up my notes because there are a lot of assumptions that go into that figure. First off, one assumption is a 2.5% inflationary factor on federal funds. That assumption was what we used for the last iteration of the transportation funding study that was conducted by us and the contractor CDM Smith. We don't have a more available estimate right now, so we are sticking with the 2.5% in federal dollars. And of course, that can change based on the federal landscape. So that's one big assumption. I'd like to remind everyone that when we balanced last year's budget, we did use $12.5 million of one-time funds. That was a transfer of from the cash fund to the transportation fund. It was from FY 2023, so before I was in this position. But that was well talked about last session. So part of this $33 million deficit is because we balanced last year on 12.5. The remainder is, of course, the revenue downgrade and taking into account inflationary increases, what we just talked about. So the assumptions for inflationary increases here, the collective bargaining agreement for state employees, that's 5.3%. We assumed a 3% for health benefits, which was part of the instructions from finance and management for the start of the budget build process. We also assume that same percentage for internal service funds. We also had assumptions for the increases to town highway aid, town highway structures, town highway class 2 roadway based on the statute. But everything else that goes into this deficit, I'd like to point out, is level funded, meaning that if we spent $103 million on that paving program, it's assumed that once again, we'll spend $103 million going out into the future. So if we're talking about an inflationary factor of 3% or even greater, if my chief engineer, Jeremy Reed, were sitting next to me, he would tell you all that construction inflation is 29%. So if it's 103 million last year and 103 million next year, what this deficit is saying is basically the delta of inflation is being absorbed by another cut in the agency's budget. And most likely a push to the project delivery schedule. That is all I had to talk about this outlook, and I could go into the rescission plan now, or I could take questions.
I think we can go into the rescission plan. Thanks.
Great. This is the rescission plan. It starts as a memo, and then the second page is what Logan had on the screen. So this is the plan itself. We also have an addendum that describes each one of these line items. That was also submitted to the committee, but I'm going to be speaking off of this spreadsheet here. And I can take questions as we go through. So give me a second. All right, so the difference between the January 25 consensus revenue forecast and the July 25 consensus revenue forecast was $7.5 million. That was above the 1% threshold that required the administration to propose a spending reduction plan to the Joint Fiscal Committee. We presented a plan to JTAC first on September 17th, and then once again to Joint Fiscal on September 18th, where it was approved. And we'll go through line by line now, if that sounds good. Okay. So this.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. I think very few of us were here the last time there were a lot of rescissions in state government. Does that seem accurate? I think you were here, Bill. Thank you for your service. And so this is just, we are likely entering an economic slowdown, economic downturn. So this is interesting to hear about this specific case. It's also just the first time this has happened in a long time. And I don't want to say that, more will definitely happen, but it's a reality that we need to reckon with in a real way. And so I just encourage folks to think about this single instance in that frame of what sort of is at stake in the year ahead and the years ahead. Thank you.
All right, so the total amount that we were trying to find for the spending reduction plan, all transportation funds, $7.5 million. So our first line 2 here, 270,000 reduction. This isn't a reduction in carry forward that was approved for summer and fall highway projects above and beyond what the project managers actually requested in carry forward. This was basically like a my discretion CFO add-on to what the project managers had requested. So the reduction of this item meant that that project managers did not have this money available for project overruns in the fall. And one question I got yesterday in House Appropriations was, how did that go? And I think it's going all right. Line 3 is a delay to the Springfield Garage project. We do have a lot of details about this project in the written addendum, but the most important piece of information here is that we learned from the city of Springfield this summer that there is an extension to a water line to the project site that we would want to have completed before the start of this project. So in the absence of this rescission plan, this project would have been delayed to a future budget year until the completion of that water line. Line 4 is a delay to another project, the Rutland Snow Removal Equipment Building, which is part of the Rutland Airport complex. This was for employee convenience. Upgrades included running water and sewer lines to the building and constructing a new bathroom. This is a delay to a future budget year. Line 5, a reduction in servicing and purchasing at Central Garage, hitting the maintenance budget. This effectively equates to the purchase of 4 fewer dump and snowplow trucks for 26. It results in 11 dump and snowplow trucks beyond their 8-year lifespan. central garage employees will be maintaining our vehicles for a longer period of time in fiscal 26. And they will be cycling in our spare vehicles because 10% of our fleet is currently not on the road as part of a spare reserve. Line 6, 415,000 reduction in tree cutting. This item does 100% eliminate contracted tree cutting in this spring of 26. However, 80% of a typical year's worth of tree cutting is maintained in-house anyway. So you can think of it as 80% of our tree cutting is continuing to happen, even though this reflects all of the contracted.
Representative Elizabeth?
Sorry, next line.
This line 7, a $300,000 reduction in preventative culvert maintenance projects. So this line eliminates a handful, 5 preventative culvert maintenance projects, which typically exist to ensure paving over a failed culvert does not occur. But all of our maintenance districts did confirm that the culvert projects that would have been completed with these funds did not have a paving project scheduled for 26. So we're not paving over something that failed.
Just noting that many of the flooding events we've experienced over the past couple of years have been made worse by failed culverts. So just naming that for the record and hoping that you took that into account when you made those comments.
Absolutely. I would also like to say that I, as CFO, did not create the, but yes, the executive leadership team and with all of their knowledge and, supervisors, managers that report to them, were heavily involved in the creation of this.
Thanks for saying that.
Yep. All right. Line 8, a $200,000 reduction of contracted mowing services. This is a 15% reduction in contracted mowing services for 26. Mowing typically goes well beyond the clear zone. So maintenance believes that with this reduction, will still be enough space on the highway so a driver can see and have a reaction time. Line 9, $150,000. This is the return or repurpose of iPads purchased for the Vermont Asset Management Information System. These iPads were purchased for truck drivers to be logging their winter trips and salt this winter. However, the addendum goes into detail on how drivers are currently doing that in a different manner. So the decision was made to repurpose the iPads that had originally been bought for payments.
Should move through our list.
Line 10, $421,000 for the cancellation of the technology project to automate the section 1111 permits. So, right, this project sought to simplify and standardize highway access permitting project, the current highway access permitting process for Vermonters. This project started in 2021. There was a contract associated with it. We have invested significant staff efforts and we do have sunk costs associated with the project, but the decision was made to cancel the contract because the selected contractor struggled to implement our full business needs. So in the absence of the decision, it was doubtful that we could have achieved what we needed to from the contract. The sunk costs for the total project are $800,000. Line 11, $500,000. This is a delay to a Rutland rail platform project. This delays the stabilization of the upper platform of the Rutland Amtrak station to a future budget year. We recently completed a temporary stabilization effort, which the rail team believes will stabilize the platform for the next few years. So design work for this project is occurring in fiscal 26, but construction has been pushed to a future year.
Thanks.
Line 12, $100,000 in public transit. This item reflects excess state match budgeted for the 5339 FTA capital projects for bus and facility procurements. So based on the current, we receive new bus delivery schedules over time throughout a fiscal year. So based on the current bus delivery schedule, when we were creating this list, we were projecting 100,000 less of state match needs for this project. So this $100,000 reduction doesn't result in any changes to grants, contracts,
It's more like a budget adjustment process.
or service routes. Yes.
I think we can skip the, all the line items related to the conference.
Sure.
Thank you for not going to conferences for a couple months.
Okay. The last line 14, so 2.254 million in position management savings. This is a reduction. This is the result of a reduction in force that was taken in September. I do have notes from our Director of Administration, Jana Morse, who is much more knowledgeable on this topic. There's also John Berard, who spoke to this topic at the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, but I can talk about the reduction in force from the notes I have.
And we also spent a lot of time on that at the Joint Fiscal Committee meeting.
And I would really like to, thank you, apologize for interrupting. I think that what I really want to make sure is clear before we hit the noon timeframe. The drop in transportation revenue and the continued pressures on costs triggered that a major decision, $7+ million had to be made. It is almost entirely internally driven at the agency, focused on an internal effort. It was also focused on projects that were likely to have already been delayed or headed that way, or were internal projects at the agency that were for their own work. And there still were employees and people that actually lost their jobs at the end. And I understand that transportation is not the #1 issue in this building this year. However, the next set in this trend, if we can't find a short-term or long-term solution, those projects will now be in our towns, in our municipalities, those projects and those people, that number will increase. And the pressure with this work that the agency and the administration did a job of really trying to focus on their own internal areas to cut. If we can't solve a short-term or long-term funding issue, the next round of cuts are going to be in the white book, for those of you who are familiar, that will be in our towns. The system degradation will continue to increase and follow from that, and actual jobs are on the line after that. So I do emphasize that as you talk to your colleagues and we work on the other solutions in the building, this one here is real and will be felt in each of our communities over time. And it has to be part of the other conversations. It's not the #1 priority. It's probably not the #2 or 3 for most, but I want you to understand what happened this fall will continue to grow until we address the short-term and long-term lines that are there. And I appreciate the effort of the agency to keep it as internally focused as possible in these savings, but they won't be able to do that forever. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think, this was part of our first week's testimony, because it is an incredibly important part of state government, and those revenues are something we're responsible for. So thank you. Thank you, Candace, and thanks everyone for I think we're gonna, yes.
I just wanted to say, there is a transportation funding study done last January that has recommendations that we should be looking at.
Representative Muslin?
Thank you. Looking at the bar charts of transportation road quality, or I guess you want to call it. I'm remembering a long time ago when I was in House Transportation, back far enough so Rich Westman was chair in the House. He pointed out that road quality had gotten so bad in some cases you couldn't buy bottled beer in Norfolk because the trucks couldn't get to Norfolk over the crumbling roads without breaking bottles. And we worked very hard.
Campbell's right down.
That's
In the transportation infrastructure bonds and other things, road quality improved considerably for a while. And now as we're seeing, we're hearing very clearly, it's kind of going in the other direction. And I guess your message, Mr. Chair, sir, is that we're all in this discussion and all have to be responsible to the Thank you.
Thank you. That was a perfect story to end on. Thank you, everyone. Have a great lunch. Ways and Means, we're actually back in this room after lunch. So